Welcome to Girl Call Me with Tanya
and Jessica.
The podcast where Black women's voices shine.
Come for the empowerment and storytelling and stay for the sisterhood.
Girl Call Me with Tanya and Jessica's new episodes every Wednesday, everywhere you get podcasts.
Head over to girlcallme.com to find out all the ways we can continue the conversation together. Hey, it's Jessica. As we close out the year and head into the holiday season, we wanted to take a moment to reflect on what this podcast has meant to us. When we started this podcast, we thought we were creating something to share with all of you, a space to explore vulnerability, boundaries, self-care, and everything in between. But what we realized is that this podcast has been a gift to ourselves. In sharing these conversations with you, we've been learning and growing alongside you. Each episode has been an opportunity to dig deeper into who we are, confront our own challenges, which is sometimes challenging in itself, and celebrate our wins, big and small. And knowing that you're here with us, showing up for these conversations, has made it all the more meaningful. As you listen to this special holiday episode filled with some of our most thought-provoking moments from Season 2, we hope it inspires you to reflect on your own journey this year. And as always, we're so grateful to be in community with you, learning, growing, and healing together. Wishing you peace, love, and light this holiday season. Let's get into it. Black women are some of the highest educated groups of people there are. And I was talking to someone and she was explaining to me this idea that like when she doesn't know something, she's going to go search and then find a way to learn it so that she can then become an expert. And I said to her, you realize that that's not what everyone does, right? I said, you realize that there are lots of people who, if they don't know the answer, they feel comfortable in a room just saying like, oh, that's an interesting point. What do you
Lots of them. We
mean
see
by
her.
that? Or saying like, I don't understand that word you just used. Will you tell me what that means? Or like, it. And I think that even when we talk about vulnerability for Black women, even that conversation, I have a lot of people in my life who that feels uncomfortable. I should know this. Even if it's something like completely out of their field, I should know this.
Right,
Now,
right.
not only let me go
right.
learn it, but let me get a master's in it. Let me master it.
Right.
And
Right. Meanwhile, there are a lot of people, as you pointed out, there's a lot of people that don't feel as though one, they have to
right.
know it, or two, they need to go through all of that Sturm und Drang instead of just saying, hey, I don't know. And that goes back to the being vulnerable. Are we willing and do we have the luxury of just saying, you know what, I don't know that. Could you share that? And if we do, I think we'll probably, I don't know if I would sleep. I would probably be up all night going, I wonder what they thought. I would probably don't like me. Da 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 da. Oh my God, I'm not gonna get that promote. Like we start
Yeah,
obsessing
or
about
even
it.
if I say I know it, will they believe that I know it without the 2 or 3 letters after my name that show that I've mastered it, right? Like I need to go
Right. Trust
I
and
need to go
belief.
seek that external, like, not only validation, but, like, authentication. Like, this person knows this information. You cannot take this away from them, right? I think that there is a whole lot of and, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying if you're Black and you're a woman, you got a degree for that reason. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think there's a lot of us who feel like, I won't have to try to prove to someone that I know something if I can just say that I have my MBA. Then they're not going to question me on if I know what I'm talking about when it comes to XYZ. Or
Well, the scary thing is it
it
doesn't
doesn't.
matter though.
No, we're
They're
full.
still gonna look. They still look at. They still look at you, and they're still gonna make an assumption.
I'm glad you talked about kind of this idea that 70% of people are dealing with imposter syndrome, which obviously is many more. We're not trying to say that imposter syndrome is something that Black women only experience, but can you talk about kind of that unique experience, as for you, I mean, as someone who is probably a woman of not many, whether that was in your VP table, whether that was in your economics major. So that you're dealing with that plus the microaggression piece, which is racism too. Like, how does, now that you're kind of, have studied so much in this, can you look back, see the different layers that of identity that are coming to play in some of the imposter syndrome conversations?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about why we experience imposter syndrome. Sure, most people experience imposter syndrome. I think that percentage is probably higher. It hasn't been
Right.
studied, but I think it's higher,
Yeah.
especially for women of color, especially for Black women. I mean, even, and look, I'm not an expert on the dating, but if there's some research on the dating apps that show that Black women and Asian men are at the bottom of that, right? Like, I was like, oh, this makes sense. But in the work scenario, things happen to us. People say things to us that make us doubt ourselves. So, for example, I remember the first week of work, and somebody came up to me, a new job, and said, "Hey, are you the new diversity hire?" And it's like, okay, if somebody is automatically assuming that you only got your job because of diversity initiatives rather than your competence, you are going to doubt yourself.
Right.
When you have a colleague or a boss that questions your competence, that says, "Are you sure that's right? Did you double check that with so and so?" And you're like, "Why do I need to do that? They're not, I don't understand. They're not, I'm the expert here. This is my area." Then when you look at compensation, right? And you find out that your white male colleague with the exact same title is making more than you. And of course, there's data on those differences. But when it's personal, because you can read a study, but then when you're at your job and you find out that you're just making less and you know what, you're doing more. I have a friend that quit her job and they had to hire not one, not two, but three people to do the job that she was doing and getting paid less for it. You're going to doubt yourself. Why are they paying me less?
Right.
Am I worth less? Right? And then
Right.
the other thing is because the bar is higher for us, it just is, then, we are going to doubt ourselves because we're like, I didn't achieve perfection. I didn't get to, and almost we set impossible standards for ourselves. Well, I'll just say I do, right? And then when I don't get it, I'm like, I'm a failure. But it's like, girl, look what you just did. And who are, if you just compare yourself to the average, you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. Yes.
Yes.
You mentioned safety before,
Yeah.
and I think that's a big piece of it, right? I am pretty good at forgiving myself as I've gotten older. I don't hold, but I am a lot harder on myself, and I hold myself to much higher standards than I do other people sometimes. And that's, that's probably being part of that's being Black women and just knowing that you're under a microscope all of the time. And so if you don't hold yourself accountable, someone else is going to be quick to do it. And they're going to do it in a way that's going to take you down, not in a way that's going to build you up and help you grow. How do you deal with forgiveness for yourself? I have a feeling you're probably the opposite of me
I
and
think
harder on
I'm
yourself.
hard on myself on some ways and other things. Like I'm really good at mental block. I compartmentalize like no one
Mm,
else. And so I literally can block out half of my what's going on and just be like, okay, this. But I think if you were in my family, you would say that I have a hard time. I will talk to you and I will support you, but I'm not sure I would forgive you
right.
as easy
Mm,
as, and I don't forgive myself. I mean, I hold on to stuff so deeply. I remember when I got divorced, my first marriage, I moved to Texas and I was in an apartment for 6 months with no furniture and literally sitting on a bed because I felt like I was literally punishing myself. Now, was it my fault?
mm,
I don't think so. I mean, it was just a thing that ended. But I remember for 6 months, I remember my best friend going, "Okay, it's now time for you to leave your house." And I was working, but I would go to work, but I would like literally not just do anything that caused luxury or do anything that was going
mm.
to make me happy because I was punishing myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For letting people down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And often it's like not letting ourselves down. Because if we were punishing ourselves because we let ourselves down, that would be a very different story. But it's often we feel like we're letting someone else down. Someone else's needs are more important than us.
Right.
And we're
And
letting them
so
down.
how do you shed, if you don't, how do you move through? How do you move through that? It took me a long time. I will say that therapy really helped me, but still, I go back and forth and waffle in that moment in which I'm like, it's very easy for me to go back to that rabbit hole.
Mm.
I think sometimes we struggle with depression, even if we're all happy and we pretend to be happy. It's still hard sometimes. And I think as Black women, you feel like the whole race is on your back. So you can't really, if you make a mistake,
Right.
you have the whole entire community that you're disappointing.
Right. Or you're like the first in your family who's done something. So now you're letting down your family, you're letting down your community, you're letting down.
But
my inner voice is someone asked me the other day, like, what is the sound of your inner voice? And I was like, my inner voice is sneaky because it's not outright shameful. Like I didn't actually understand shame for a really long time because I was like, I don't ever say bad things to myself. Like I'm never like, because I heard it as like a reprimand, and my voice is never doing that. So shame for me shows up in like these ways where it is more of like, well, you shouldn't do that. You couldn't do it. You know that this didn't work out for you because XYZ, right? It's more of this like resigning to the fact of like, girl, you should have known that you weren't going to be able to do this, this, and this, right? So that for me is more of like, yeah, it's not outright like degrading. It's more of just this like questioning myself and being like, you should have known better. And that
will take me down a
really
spiral.
hard for me.
The thing is that because I feel I should always know better, or I should be better. I should be, so I'm like, oh my God, and it's so funny. I'm really lucky to be married to someone who doesn't go down the rabbit hole and the spiral with me, and literally will.
Yeah, mine either. He stands at the top, like, girl, what are you doing down there? And when are you coming back?
Right. And
I'm not going down to get you.
It's usually, okay, well, you sound like you're going to be harder on yourself than anybody else. So it's time to like dust yourself off, keep it moving, and let's think through a plan.
Yeah.
And so I think that, not having, if I had someone that was in the hole with me, girl.
No, none, never. It's the storytelling. Storytelling is my superpower and also my Achilles heel, all at the same time. Because I could tell you and I could whip up a narrative like you've never heard before. Doesn't mean it's true. It's true.
Probably isn't. Can I tell you one story I told myself? So this is like, this is insane. So I realized through good therapy and, life that I was gay. And so I was obviously an adult. I was like, they call it older second life or whatever. And I was on a cruise with my best friend who is gay and in a very happy long-term marriage, right? Girl, I was scared to tell her because so we're on the, and she'll tell the story. So we're on the deck on this cruise, and I think I really even planned this cruise for this. So I'm like,
right. Wait, was it? Wait. Hold on a second.
No,
was this a gay cruise? Did you say?
Just a cruise, just a good old fashioned.
Oh, okay.
It was a birthday cruise.
I thought it was. I thought you went that far.
It was a birthday cruise. And so we're on there. We're on the deck, and I said, I have to tell you something. And she said, yes. I think I like chicks. That was a quote. And she's like, okay. And then she had Pat asked a few questions, and she was like, I was like, well, I thought you weren't gonna love me. I was like, but she's like, I am married to woman, what are you talking about? But this is the story.
The story.
It's my own self
Yeah.
internalized.
So what would you, as you think about like what would you tell yourself?
Oof,
I think about
girl.
I think what I would tell myself is like it's okay to feel,
Hmm.
Jessica, right? Like it's okay that you don't know how to feel, but it's also okay whatever you're feeling is valid. Like you don't need to get permission to feel things. And just because the other people around you aren't in the same
Yeah.
space, aren't doing the same thing as you, that's okay. Because I think that I told myself it was like trying to mimic what other people were doing. And I think I would just tell myself like it's okay. You own those
Yeah.
feelings
Yeah.
and not have shame there.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think I would tell myself, I think I would tell myself that it's okay to not always fit into a box.
Mm,
You don't need to be the thinnest, be this size. You don't need to sound or sound like everyone else. You don't need to be like everyone else. And that you can come as you are and people will actually like you and appreciate you. And I had a very loving grandmother who loved and cared for me. And also, that was okay. I didn't need a traditional mother to care for me because I had a very much strong, loving grandmother that raised me the way I am.
yeah. I'm so glad we're doing this and talking about this because part of the thing that you and I have talked about before is we will, and I think a lot of people do this. I certainly think a lot of Black women do, like minimize the things that we go through because we've talked about this even on the generational tip, kind of like, really, Jessica, you're going to talk about like your feelings. And it's like, yeah, that stuff, when you're 10 years
Mm,
old, that stuff is really, really
right.
big. And it's important that you have the opportunity to kind of talk through these things and also feel validated, regardless of, what you were,
Yeah.
even if something was trivial or like, these were just shitty kids who grabbed your butt and that's all it
I
was.
think I may
Guess
have
what?
liked him. I don't remember.
Yeah, you probably did. But it's like that doesn't mean they could have just been
Mhm.
shitty
It could
kids.
have
That
been
doesn't mean it didn't have an
right.
impact and it doesn't mean it didn't feed into a story you were already telling
Right.
yourself. I am very intentional about what I do now. So I may have a lot of things on my list and a lot of like areas of
Yeah.
focus, but it's not on my list anymore. It's not on my list unless it is the highest of priorities and means a lot to me and has there's always
Yeah.
intentionality. I don't do a lot anymore that
Right.
isn't going to serve
That's
me.
true.
And in the past, I would just be in the mix just to be in the mix.
True.
Just to say I was there, just to be there, just to now I'm like, and honestly, I think COVID helped me with
Mm,
this. Like because I used to just think I was like a purebred extrovert because that's what you would think when you knew me when I was like younger. And then COVID hit and I was like, oh, I kind of like this. I kind of like this time by myself. And what I realized is I could be in a room with 100 people and not speak to any of them. And I would come out with the exact same high as I would get
mm,
when I used to be working the room like a maniac. And so I was like, oh, I'm an introverted extrovert. I like energy from people, but the way I get it doesn't have to be me
into
going,
it.
seeking, pulling it
Right.
out. I could just sit in an area. And I think that's why I love New York so
Mm.
much. I could go a whole day without talking to anybody, but feel completely fulfilled. And it's like, because I'd be taking the train with people, I walk through a park, I'm watching people watching. That's all I need.
And maybe it's that COVID did it, or maybe it's just life. Because in some ways, I feel I've always been. The joke has been I've always been a butterfly.
Hmm.
I can be in a room and you'd be like, I walk out and I probably spoke with 100 people, and they're like, they all think They connected, but I'm like, "I don't know you." And I do butterfly almost in life in the sense of a dabble, a dabble, a dabble, a dabble. But I think there's a part of me that's probably a defense mechanism, because if I were to
Mm,
sit and have 2 or 3 really deep, meaningful, you would get to know me just a little too
not
close.
Tanya.
I'm not trying to get to
Yeah,
know you.
not
I'm not
Tanya.
trying to you to ask me too many questions that no, don't. Move on. And I always, when people try to ask me too many personal questions, I'm like, I don't trust you.
Right.
So it's interesting. Am I really an extrovert?
That was so comforting. And it not was, it is comforting. We've gone through a lot together. And yeah, that sister love is just something that cannot be.
Yeah.
It's not better or worse than anything else, but there's just nothing that can compare
No.
to it, honestly.
No. And you know, over time, and then those friendships and those sisterhood, it changes as you go through different stages in your life, whether it's the loss of a family member or it's
Mhm.
illness or it's some those things are those relationships just are solid.
Yeah.
But how
Yeah.
so on that, how have you been able, because I know it's hard for me, the busier I get, the more that I have in my life, the more like stress. How are you able to keep those relationships going and tight?
Oof, as a, recovering people pleaser, this is very
Are we
hard for me
recovered? I'm
because
just curious.
I said
Oh yeah,
recovering.
that's true. You're active. Active.
Actively, recovering. I It's really hard for me for a long time because I like those deep relationships. I got to a point in my life in my late 20s where I felt like I was doing everything for everybody because I didn't want to say no, because I
Mm,
didn't want that to be a reflection of how I felt about our friendship, right? Then I moved to New York, and with most of my friends here in Southern California, that helped me a lot get over that part, get over the like transactional part of relationships, and kind of forced me to recognize that showing up at someone's baby shower is not what makes you a lifelong friend,
no.
right? It's showing up when they need you, it's being
Mm,
able to call them, it's letting people know when you're thinking about them. And so for me, as I've gotten older, it's it's really and this is honest, like, I think a lot about each friendship and what I get from each friendship and why it's so uniquely special to me, and I try to focus on doing things that strengthen that,
mm,
right? And so that's not frequency for some people.
yeah.
Like, texting all the time or getting on the phone all the time, not only does it not fit into my life or other people's lives, it wasn't deepening the relationship.
Right.
I just was, fortunate enough to see one of my girlfriends in Chicago, and I would have thought, like, you would have thought we saw each other, I don't know, 2 weeks
Last week,
ago, and we were
right?
joking, and I was like, "Wait a second." Her son came walking in, he's, like, 10 years old, and I'm like, "Well, he wasn't born yet, so I guess it's been longer than that." But we don't need that in our
Right.
relationship because our relationship is built on something very different. So I I guess that's a long way of saying that as I've grown up, I've really taken inventory of each friendship I have and figuring out what do I need to make sure that that friendship continues to grow. And it's not the same for everybody, and it doesn't I do not confuse motion with progress.
Mm.
Like, it's not just doing things and being somewhere.
Girl, that was good. Like, I feel like that motion, I do not confuse motion with progress.
Look,
Sister, that's a t-shirt. And we about to sell that. It will be
I
on
didn't make
sale.
that up.
I know, but it's
I didn't
amazing.
make that
I
up,
love
but
that. I felt that to my bones.
yeah,
I felt that.
and deep
Okay.
relationships. And I want to be friends with everybody and do whatever. But some people, like, I was talking to one of my girlfriends the other day who was just sharing with me about kind of just her day-to-day life, and her kids are in school and they're playing on sports teams, and her life is a lot of time spent with people that she's not choosing to spend time with,
Right.
right? It's circumstantial. It's the kids' school, it's the kids' games, it's the kids' whatever. that's just her season, right? Like that's
Right.
what her life is, and she's, making friends with those people, but it's not the same as maybe she would choose to do. I live a very different life, right? I don't have kids. I don't
Mhm.
You already know I've said I don't do things that I don't want to do. So I don't have to like go to things and force conversations. But I think there's a season for that in people's lives. But I do feel like if you have relationships, there's a lot of those relationships that'll come back around,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
I was thinking about people that, you're friends with, and then you go through a life thing
Yeah.
and maybe you don't talk to them. And then suddenly you're on the other side of it. And now, you're able to pick that relationship back up again. Those are beautiful friendships too.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've talked a lot about those beautiful friendships and those great times. But what about that bridge when things don't always go perfect and you have to either take a break or take a moment? How do you deal with a close friend that you have a disagreement with?
Look, I think there is, how I deal with it now versus how I dealt with it when I was younger, probably two different things. I think um now I'm like, sometimes people need a moment. That's my husband
Mm.
speaking, by the way, too. That
He gives
is
people moments. He'll.
no, he tells me to give people moments.
Oh.
He's not giving he's more of just like, look, sometimes like you it's the you can't be everything. It's going back to what I said before. You can't be everything for everybody. And there's certain times in people's life where you may not offer something that is right for them, right? And I think it's being honest and it's
Right.
not forcing the issue. I think when I was younger, I forced the issue. Like, why don't we something happened this week? Why don't we feel as close? Why aren't we talking as much? You're not doing this. And I know,
You
look, I have
stressing me.
girlfriends
That
that
sounds
probably
stressful.
listening, right? Because I told you I have high expectations and it's sometimes kind of crazy. But so I know I probably have a girlfriend listening to this who's like, yes, you did this. Because I feel like I don't know. Like there's a Mm, I don't know what it is, but either way, I felt like I had high expectations for people, and I had a really hard time when I felt like something wasn't going the way that
Mm.
I thought it should be
Mhm.
going, right? And now I think I'm able to see like if someone says something to me about something's not working or some was offended, like I'm open to apologizing to things. I'm open to also saying we don't need to we can take some space. Like
Mhm.
also if I'm too much right now or if you don't wanna talk about the type of things I wanna talk about, that's okay. You know, I'm not at the age where I'm like, we're not gonna be friends anymore. I don't have the time for that.
It's funny because I could do a disappearing act
Right.
because
Oh my god, that's
it's
hilarious.
like whoop whoop, where'd she go? Because I used
I
to.
wish I could.
I think I have evolved. I think
You
I
did say that in, like, a last episode or the episode before or something. You're like, "Yeah, we talked about forgiveness," and you were like, "Oh, yeah,
mm, mm,
I'm hard
it's hard.
I'm hard pressed to forgive."
It's hard. It's
I will forgive, but I will not
and
forget.
it
That's
could
what you said, I think.
yeah, I don't. And I could be like cool with you if you call me, you need something, I would give it. But if you cross me, I'm just like, and I say cross, right? That's harsh, right?
Yeah, look at you.
I'm
I was gonna say just like that, like, who okay, you're talking burying bodies and crossing you, like, I need to
yeah.
understand
So I hope I don't get called
what's
by the
happening
authorities aren't calling. But I
well,
think
what's happening in your life, girl? Like,
you
this
never
sounds
know. Remember,
severe.
I like
This
Lifetime.
sounds this I was just gonna say, this sounds like a BET show.
Could be.
Like, if you double cross me
I'm taking you. But it's funny because there was a time in which I'd be moonwalk out, and be like, crickets. But I have learned as I've gotten older that everybody makes mistakes.
Girl, thank God we weren't friends, by the way, and, like,
But,
when I was, like, 20 and you were 30, because 'cause you'd be moonwalking, and then I'd be chasing you
oh
like,
God.
"No, no, tell me why. Tell me why we
I'd
can't
be
be
like,
friends.
girl, they
What's going on?
click
What are you feeling like?" And you're like, "Ghosting me."
disconnect.
Right?
Blocked.
There's a long list of things. I think, like, how do you deal with the guilt? Because for me, it's like I have a lot of very close friends, which means I have a lot of people who are going through something
Mm,
all of the time. And I am an empath and
mhm,
I will overextend myself. And
mhm.
then I will end up, I'm an empath and an extrovert. So I will end up like
Burned.
emotionally bankrupt
Mhm.
on the
Burned
ground,
out.
being like, what happened? How did this happen? And so I have to monitor how like always feeling like I'm showing up for people, but also being really honest about what's going to be too much for me, and not just triggering too much, but just like from a load too much. Like what's just too heavy? How do you get guilt with that? Am I alone in this? Am
It's
I
funny.
crazy?
Dr. Jay Cherie, who we had on our show, said, "You cannot pour from an empty cup."
Yep.
And if you are so spent, and if you're giving so much that you're not giving yourself, taking care of yourself, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you cannot really pour into other people and really be at the level that they may need during their hardest times. So I don't sit with guilt because I know that I'm doing and giving as much as I can.
Hmm.
And I think that, there are times that I probably like, ooh, I probably should have like turned that, maybe took got off the phone or did that, not went and did this or this and this. But I think that if you're sitting with guilt, is because you're not doing enough. But if you're doing enough,
Oh,
you should give yourself
I don't feel like that.
grace. You should give
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
the grace
Yeah.
that you deserve. And because that other person who you're giving to, they don't feel they probably feel like you're doing what you need to do to take care of them and support them.
Right. Yeah, so often it's your
It's
own
our own thing.
expectations.
It's our own
But
thing.
I think you but going back to what you said earlier, like, in my opinion, real friendships are if the person does feel like you're not showing up, it's okay for them to say that, or it's okay for them to
Right.
request that you do show up, and you should be okay saying, like, "Hey, I hear you.
Mhm.
I can't right now.
Yes.
I don't have any more." Or you should be okay being like, "Hey, I hear you. Damn, that's on me." Like, I think that you should be able to say both of those. I think that the former, the "Hey, I just don't have any more to give,"
Mm.
is really hard for me
Mhm.
in particular. I feel like I've been in the last few months, I've been kind of in a space where, like, I just don't have any more to give, and that's because I got my own stuff going on, but that's because I'm supporting a lot of people in different ways that I is not really something I will share with other friends.
Right.
And so, but I would be totally okay if a friend said to me, "Hey, I feel like you haven't been there for me," and I would feel totally comfortable in this moment, which is growth for me, to be able to say, "I don't have it."
Mm.
And I can't really, it's not my story to talk to you about why I can't, or it is my story to tell you why I can't, but it's not my story to tell you all the stuff on my plate, but what I can tell you is I promise you if I had more I would, and
Yeah.
right now I just don't. And that's growth for me, cuz
Right.
girl, I would make an excuse up
No, mhm.
before, and then like caught myself at a dinner not being able to like see straight and being like, "Yeah, it's fine. Like let's go do this
Right.
and, whatever." Like
Meanwhile,
meanwhile, yeah,
meanwhile, and I think if you're able to say that to a friend, and I think that I have heard her being so direct, but if you're able to say that to someone and they're able to receive that and
yeah,
go, "I hope I can help you, whatever you need," then that's a good friend.
yeah, and yeah,
And if
that
right,
you know what? That's what we should all like I mean, that's what I would love people to take away from this, including myself. Like, just think about what other people have on their
right,
plates. Like before you're quick to be like, this person didn't show up for me, or this person didn't do this, or I can't believe,
yeah,
just like take a beat,
take that
right? If that's
beat.
If that's out of character for someone, think about what may be going on,
And maybe
right?
ask, is something going on? Can I help you? I feel your
Right,
energy. Because if you're like, I feel your, and
right.
sometimes I'll be like, I feel your energy. And sometimes they're like, you're just feeling too much. But I think based on my profession, my chosen profession of being a fundraiser, we have a hard time. No is usually not today. When I hear no, I hear, not today.
Oh
And
my God. When
so,
I hear no, I feel like I hear like, don't ever in this lifetime say that thing to me
oh my
again.
God, girl, you are so extreme when it comes to all of this. This is a lot. No, yeah, when I hear no, and it depends. Honestly, and I will be saying, it's honestly depends. But if it's something I really want, I am driven to persuade.
Mm.
And I think I would argue that I'm persuasive. And I know the audience might say, you're like, who is this chick? But I do. I think it is, and it could be because I'm a fundraiser. It could be, that I've always had to, and actually, it could be because I'm a woman.
You're doing a lot of shout outs this episode, but shout out to Shelly. Shelly told me once, I said, I feel like I'm really direct. And she said it exactly right. She said, you start at a 10, and then your second sentence is like a 4,
Oh
and then
God, you
you
went straight to
finish
four.
at like a 6. And she's like, so that nets out at about like a 5. So no, you're not direct. And
No,
I was
you're
like, that's
not direct.
actually the best way. I like pad everything because I say what I feel right away, but then I have such a hard time with owning my feelings, which we talked about like 2 episodes ago. I just have always had a hard time with that. So I quickly go to like, ooh, like tiptoe back. Let me like
Right.
pull out of that and like not ruffle feathers. And so the boundaries is the same thing for me. I'll put up a boundary, but then as soon as I feel like that boundary, as soon as I see the impact of that boundary on someone else, I'll negotiate,
How is
which
that,
is really
sir?
sad. I'm negotiating my own feelings. Doesn't serve me
Right.
well at all.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
serve
Yeah.
me at all. Girl,
Yeah.
this is why this is my most of my therapy is around this. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'll
And
say, yeah, I didn't think this episode was gonna be about me. I thought it was gonna be about us trashing you.
you're right. You know what? That how good I am about boundaries. This done
God.
turned.
I
This
may
done
I may not
turned.
I may not show up for the part 2 with the therapist. You may not find that may be my boundary. I may be
I
like, "You
got
know what, Tanya?
like this.
Tanya, you take this one."
No, it's so interesting because I say at 10. If you study the reaction and how a person's going to react to something, you
Yeah.
can set the boundary and hope that they will react in that way, and in some ways agree with the boundary that you set. Does that sound like a lot of work to most people who
Yeah.
are listening?
I mean, that does sound
Maybe.
like a lot of work. Yeah. And also I feel like if you're super empathetic, it doesn't matter that you set the boundary and it works for you. You're still caught up in how's it making them feel.
But if it's about you
I
and
hear
what
you.
you're going to do,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
you
hear
should
you.
it's not
I'm saying,
about
but if
them.
you're someone who gets, so my anxiety will come from, it was funny. My therapist was kind of saying something like this to me about like my anxiety probably gets more wound up or something when I'm when my cup's not full, right? So
Mm.
when I feel like whatever, like I haven't been doing things for myself, when I'm then pushed to a space where I'm like, now I need to set a boundary with someone else, it's really hard for me to do it because it's like I I have no boundaries and then I'm trying to set this one boundary and so then that's all I can think about and it's like the dumbest little thing. But and then all I can think about is how they're going to react. and how that's going to be even more that I have to think about and like sit with me is that.
Yeah. We need calling
Caught.
Kayla.
Caught in the rapture.
Caught in the
I
rapture.
need
I need to
I'm
phone a
caught up
friend.
in the rapture.
I need to phone a friend. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And if you are not being fulfilled in relationships, and if people aren't giving to you as you're giving to them, it feels like a waste.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, okay, so going back to like, how do I back myself into boundaries?
Yes. Can we go forward? Do we
I
have
think,
to
well, oh no, what I was
moonwalk
going
our
to say
way?
is I think I was going to say, I think the other way that I do it is kind of going back to the friendship episode is I make a really concentrated effort to have people in my life who will do the same things for me that I'll do for them. And I have no doubt about that. So, you know, maybe that helps.
Well, you talked a little bit about your cave, that you've caved a few times. That you start at 100, you're like, I'm strong, I'm going in, I got my script.
I thought you
And
meant like my cave, like I go into
no,
a
I don't
cave.
know. You might,
Which is true.
but you start at 100, and then by the
Mhm.
time, but how do you?
Yeah, you
So
could work me down.
they can. So how do you stay firm? And it sounds like you don't stay firm. So do you have? If you were going to give advice to yourself on how to stay
Yeah.
firm, what advice would you be giving yourself?
Say what you feel the first time. I don't even need to give that to myself. My husband tells me that all the time. Say what you mean the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Say it. You know what it is. Why don't you just say it?
Regardless of how the other person receives it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm not often like struggling to figure out how I feel about something. It's more of like I'm figuring out how it's going to land. Right. I'm thinking about that more.
You're so
I'm not
worried about
struggling
the
with what I'm thinking
landing
about.
that you're like,
Uh-huh.
and I think, I think you're about to do, I think you're about to do this. I have
I'm on the cusp.
You're
I'm on the cusp. Watch out, people. 2025.
Watch out, friends and family.
No, I will say, look, I'm going to give myself a lot of credit, especially before we have to do a part 2 with the therapist coming in here.
People treat us and like how we want to
Yeah.
be treated. And this is not, I did not make this up, but I heard it from someone. The difference between rules and boundaries, I think, is really important. So boundaries being really focused on myself, what I can control, sure, how I want to be treated, right? But not in terms of like what other people are doing, but in terms of what I am willing to do or not do. How I am willing to engage or not engage, versus a rule would be perhaps something that you set for someone else and their behavior, or how they are engaging with you. And I think that's somewhere where people get really caught up, especially when we get like kind of on the beginning pieces of this boundary journey, is like we start setting rules left and right for how other people are going to engage and treat us, and we can make those requests, but we have no power or control in the follow through. Right. And so people get really upset or feel really kind of disregarded because the focus isn't maybe on the right person.
Yeah, that I love, because it's like we do get caught up, and probably it's like the pop culture piece of like therapy,
absolutely.
where everyone's like, I know what boundaries is because I saw an Instagram like post that someone created in Canva, and it's like, that's it. But I think that the rules is really interesting, because I think, I'll speak for myself, it's probably easier for me to set a rule for someone else than it is for me to set a boundary for myself. So for example, me saying to Tanya, you're not allowed to text me about political stuff in the week leading up to the election, I should actually probably be saying, you could do whatever you want, girl. Like, I'm not making rules for you. I'm not responding to you. Or
Right.
you're silenced,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think it's can be more difficult because it requires identifying what our need is.
Yes.
Like, what is the thing that I actually need to be happening here? Versus, what is the thing that I don't like? What's the thing that's triggering me, right? Because we can identify that pretty readily. Like, oh, I didn't like that. That didn't feel good. But why? What do I need from this? How could I state this as a positive thing? As in, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I need you to do. Versus,
right.
don't do this.
Yeah, and I think for people like myself who are like, "You gonna tell me what to do?" It's hard.
People like
I
myself.
listen.
By
Triggered.
people like
I
myself, she means
I
she means people
woo,
who tell people
triggered
what to do.
because I was like, "You are not gonna tell me I can't." And I think that the control aspect is a thing for me. And I also think, and I'm sure many people who are listening, and I think the another part is, how do you know what you need? I
Mm,
sometimes feel like I'm on a delayed reaction. And so I sometimes don't know what I need until I'm like, oh, maybe I needed that. But it's hard to kind of speak to that in the moment.
hmm Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a practice, right? Like needs are connected to feelings,
Yes.
and folks who are marginalized in all types of way,
Mm,
whether that be people of color, whether that be women, whether you're at the intersection of, being a
yeah.
Black woman, whatever it is, right? We are actually very good at delaying making that connection between like the feeling that is happening right now, what I need, and doing something about it. In some ways it's a superpower. Like something wild is happening right now, but I'm just gonna sit here and smile and nod, and I'll talk about it later with my homegirls, or I'll talk about it later with my family, right? But I'm not going to react in that moment. I'm not going to fully connect even to the feeling of it in my body, because that would create a different sort of response. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not safe, or it's not quote unquote professional, or whatever is, the societal judgment, right? Like we can't do that in the moment. So we learn over time to kind of push those things down until it is a safe space, until we have time to process it. But in some ways, then we have that kind of disconnect or that delay in our needs. And that's not
Yeah.
obviously everyone, but a good amount of people.
Or exposure to your lived experiences
Hmm
is not necessarily you share an experience with your therapist, but
Yeah.
can you talk just about, obviously that's what a lot of your work is focused on, but just kind of the benefits for people looking for a therapist who understands kind of their story and their experience?
Yeah. I love this question because it is so much of the work that I am interested in doing, that I'm doing, is just hopefully helping people to recognize that therapy is not one size fits all. And sometimes, you have an experience and it truly is just the therapist. It just wasn't a good fit. And I say that because I hear people message me, or, DM me or whatever in these different spaces, and are like, yeah, like therapy is not for me, right? And maybe that's true for someone. I haven't met them yet, though, where like just across the board, that's not the case. Maybe that type of therapy wasn't for you. Maybe that therapist wasn't for you. But if you're interested in something, there's enough variety there. I think that folks can get their needs met with the right resources. So I guess when I'm thinking about looking for a therapist, or someone kind of asks me about it, recognizing that there are different types of therapists and there are different types of therapies, I think is really like a kind of baseline crucial thing. People sometimes get very, including me, overwhelmed by the variety of folks with their different titles and the acronyms and all of the things, right? But if I was going to say, like, here's the one thing to focus on, I think it would be the type of therapy and how much you connect with the therapist. So some therapies are more talk based. They look maybe more like what we think therapy will look like, in terms of like you talk, the therapist listens. But there are also ones that the therapist plays a more active role. There's ones where you do like homework. There's ones where that happen in a group format. All of those things. And so those are the types of questions that I might be asking a therapist about.
Mm.
What type of therapy do you do? And they'll give you something and you're like, oh, I don't know what that is because I don't know anything about that. But that follow-up question of, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What does a typical session look like? Maybe what happens if I don't agree with something that you said? Those are the sorts of questions that I would want to know
Yeah.
if I was looking for a new therapist. And then also you can ask them straight up, like, what is your experience and familiarity working with whatever is the thing that is bringing you to therapy, whatever
Mm.
you feel like is most important. Because like you said, for some people, kind of having that identity match
Yeah.
feels most important for them to be comfortable. And for other people, it might be that they're coming for a specific reason, whether that be, wanting to talk about a childhood experience, or to talk about a trauma that they experienced,
Right.
or to talk about relationship. And they really want to make sure, or like a particular diagnosis, they really want to make sure that the therapist has some familiarity and expertise in that thing.
Right.
And there's not really a wrong way to go about it, but just to kind of have thought about those things before can be helpful, because sometimes we won't be able to find someone who meets all of our criteria, but if we have like our top 2 or 3, hopefully we can find someone who meets those.
Breaking up with a therapist is hard.
Hey, it's Jessica. Thanks for listening to Girl Call Me. If you have something to add or a story to share, come on over to Instagram or Facebook and join the conversation. Also, make sure you follow and subscribe Girl Call Me. You don't want to miss when we release new episodes. Thanks for listening.